For our second half, we are delighted to have Kathy Way. Kathy Way is Oregon Future Lab's Census Justice Director. She also serves on the board of directors for Trimet, as well as on the North Clackamas School Board. So thank you so much for being here, Kathy.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's start with the same question, actually, that we started with art. There are so many issues that you could be spending your time on. Why is transportation one of the issues that you is worthy of your time?
That is an excellent question. Before I begin, Great, okay. I also want to acknowledge my fellow board director from Trimet in the room, Lori Bauman, is also here in the back, and so I just want to also thank her and her time for being here this evening. I think transportation is one of those things that I am not a policy person. When I started exploring transportation, I was a student, right? I was 13, 14 at the time, living in East Portland, and I was trying to basically navigate Trimet. And my grandfather was the person who researched all the different bus routes and max routes and sort of showed me the ropes, as you will, of how do we access our transportation system. So that, to me, and my experience being a young person, again, growing up in Outer East County, having to rely on Trimet for various things like school, work, and then eventually taking community members who oftentimes were former refugees, and so they had a difficult time with language barriers and accessing the system. That was really how I became more and more passionate about transportation.
Great, thank you. Yeah. So we are gathered for the second part to talk about Fairless Trimet, and that's a topic that can get philosophical, I think, very quickly in a way. So currency, and I was listening to, I don't know if you listened to Hidden Brain, but their most recent one was about basically the anthropology of money. And currency is just one language we use to describe a transactional relationship. So if you have a dollar, and I have a bunch of onions, and you want my onions, you can give me $1, and I will give you onions, and that is a one-to-one transactional relationship that we kind of, I think, understand. But when it becomes a many-to-many transactional relationship, like Medicare or, say, public transit, who benefits and what the value of that transactional relationship is changes and becomes less clear. So the first substantive question for this part, when a person boards a bus, who benefits?
I would like to think that everybody benefits. Yay! The word public, right, is important. And whether you're a young person, whether you are an individual with disabilities, whether you, have a command, right, of English as a first language, I think public transit should be accessible and equitable for everyone. And I have grown up in Portland. I've grown up in this great state of Oregon for most of my life, and I know that our communities care about each other and care about our well-beings, and I feel like some of the conversations that we have around FAIR, unfortunately, a lot of times pits communities, right, against each other and different classes against each other, and so I would like us to provide and think about what an alternative vision can look like.
Right. And it's kind of because I heard, there was a lot of applause when it's like everyone benefits. Do you feel that that's a shared understanding among most people? And why do you feel that is or is not?
I like to say so. I think in addition to people, I forget to mention the planet also benefits from having less polluting automobiles on our road. And so, if we care about, again, our climate and the impeding effects of climate change that are very real right now, we also have to take into consideration how do we become good stewards of the city, and how do we get folks from point A to point B through transportation, but again, back to this idea of creating this vision, right, of what we want to see here in our region, I think it's very doable. And we've seen other cities now taking action towards what a fairless system can look like.
What cities are you thinking of when you say that?
Kansas City is one example that comes to mind.
And that was very recent.
That was. And we also have Corvallis that obviously, these jurisdictions serve a larger service area than TriMet. And so I know that sometimes it's not a complete, apple to apple comparison, but the fact that those boards and those and the leadership of those places are having these conversations, I think we should definitely note that.
I'm going to pause. I really appreciate you talking about our climate and climate action goals. Point of privilege, I'm on the Planning and Sustainability Commission, and one of those pieces is we're looking at re-upping the climate action plan. And we've recognized that the state of Oregon are like 44% of our emissions comes from the transportation sector. That was not in my notes. I just knew that. We should all just know that. I want to start. So you were talking about how other cities have worked on Fairless Transit, and so TriMet hasn't had Fairless Transit writ large, but we've kind of, I feel like, flirted with it, right? Like we've had Fairless Square. People remember Fairless Square. We also have Youth Pass, so we're trying to expand free transit for young people, as well as a reduced fare for people over 65, and now people who are living on lower incomes. I'm curious, can you talk a little bit when we start to think about Fairless Transit and what would, again, success look like? Can you talk a little bit particularly about Youth Pass and low-income fares and how those programs have been going?
Yes. So you mentioned all of these different options for folks with limited means or limited income to access our service. And I think it's great that our agency has taken bold steps in addressing the needs of young people, for example, or the needs of our low-income folks through the low-income fare program that was implemented last year, and since then has served over 27,000 Oregonians. I think where we are still missing the picture is how do we tie all of those in, right? Instead of a patchwork of funding from different sources or different buckets, if you will. I think our agency can think about the financial sustainability of where we're headed. If we really come together and think about these are the buckets that we are already funding and that we're already subsidizing. So how do we pull those things together so that we can potentially talk about a fairless system?
Woo, now we're getting into it. So we have TriMet's budget, I think, is about 25%. About 25% of it is active ridership, ish. I mean, more or less.
The operational budget is about 25%. Or I'm sorry, the fare collected is about 25% of our operational budget.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So, which is a lot less than folks.
Right, like it's not zero, but it's not as much as many people would assume. So, and I think some people who have stated a concern around the idea of Fairless Trimet have done so, saying that this is going to denigrate service. So can I ask, what do you see pathways of pulling up that fare and ensuring that Fairless Transit is abundant?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely an argument that's out there, right? Is if we collect no fares at all, then services are going to suffer, or there's going to be parts of the Tri-County area where we're going to have to cut down on service. And that is a legitimate concern. I feel like the compromising of service should not be a compromise, and I say that because our agency also is spending millions of dollars on fare enforcement, a couple $1 million on a campaign that, a public campaign around paying fares that actually didn't quite land well with community members, and there was sort of a big, social media spotlight on why are we, right, criminalizing or victimizing folks who can't pay. So I believe we have the funding to figure out this piece and sort of this gap that we need. And we need to bring more people together. I think the fact that we are getting invited today to have this conversation signals some movement, and hopefully we get to hear from more community members who are interested about pursuing this vision.
Great. And bringing people together makes me think of, ridership, and how is TriMet working on increasing ridership so that this is a more, I think of it like when it's a better value proposition where more people are using it, it becomes it's like, well, of course, this is a social benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, over the last year, we have actually seen a 4% increase in ridership. So I will commend our agency for, doing all that they can to promote TriMet and to, as I mentioned earlier before, increase services, particularly out in East Portland, some parts of Clackamas and Washington County. I'm a Clackamas County resident, so woo. I don't know if there's any Clackamas folks here, but over the last year we have, due to House Bill 2017 funds, I didn't use HB as an acronym, but thank you to the legislature for continuing to fund some needed service enhancements. And then we also rolled out the low-income fare program. So we are headed in the right direction, again, of sort of subsidizing these programs so that we can be more accessible and equitable. But like I mentioned, it's not a complete picture, and we are seeing, I'm holding this red pledge card that was handed to me when I literally walked in the door about, region-wide youth pass, right, low-income fare. And so I think for me as a board member, this is a reminder that there's a community that wants to talk about this, that wants to explore this. And as leadership, I think we need to listen and act.
Can we talk about some of the community organizing that you have seen?
Yes, definitely. So if you're ever fortunate to show up to a TriMet board meeting at 8:30 in the morning on Wednesday mornings, we have, community members, right? A lot of transit-dependent riders, part of Opal Environmental Justice, and probably 15 to 20 other organizations that show up in full effort, and they testify and they talk about priorities for our climate, priorities for our region around transit, and we're starting to see some more young people. I don't know how they would get out of school, but we're also starting to see some young people show up, really, talking directly to the board of directors around these issues that they face. And as someone who has organized in communities and low-income communities, people of color, I think it's exciting to see that type of citizen engagement.
Right. Thank you. I just want to check this. I have so many questions. So one thing we have, I always like to think of anything that includes social change. We often are stuck in this why do something different? Like, why Fairless Trimet? I like to think of that relationship between social justice and science fiction. So it's like, why not? And so I'd like to ask the flip question, because fares currently comprise, again, as we were talking about, 25% of TriMet's operating budget. We're working to make TriMet free for young people, cheaper for people who are older or living on lower incomes. And if people who are employed are already paying through the workplace, how is Fairless Transit not the obvious next step?
Well, I think one of the biggest factors into that is the revenue question, right? And that is something that we have yet to explore. Myself and another board member a couple months ago did make a public statement saying that we are exploring what that could look like, having some conversations, and I think we need consistent, continuous community engagement and community feedback around this issue. And so if the public has ideas, email us, connect with us. I know that Metro is going to be promoting their T2020 transportation bond measure that's coming up. I'm very excited to hear that we are going to, we are on the right track to potentially fund youth. Fully fund the youth pass for our low-income high school students through that bond measure. And so there's some momentum that's building up here. And I think, again, this is the right time and the right opportunity to get engaged, right to the board members, right to, folks who represent you in your area, and let's see how we can do this.
Great. Is there a timeline for that conversation? Has that process been kind of mapped out, or is that still in process?
I believe it's still in process. We have a finance and audit committee that meets regularly, and they are sort of the smartest group of folks in our agency to really put together our numbers and our budget and present it to the board. And with this direction that they're hearing from several of us, I know that this is something that they're taking a look at.
We have, I think, question for one more question. What should I ask? I know you're not supposed to have favorites. What is your favorite bus? I have a favorite.
It's hard to. I would probably say the 72. Yes. So.
Why is it your favorite?
I mean, I grew up around 82nd Avenue. I moved around a lot in Portland, but I think living around 82nd Avenue, we have seen so many changes in terms of the number of families that are coming in, right? More diverse households, and I feel like the 72 has been sort of that like lifeline through the community, and it's also one of the lines that are we have the most riders in our entire region is on bus 72. So I think that's something to be said about the need and the urgency for a Fairless system.
Great. And last question before I let you go. I want to actually bring in your other role as the Census Justice Director. So this is the 2020 census. Can you talk a little bit about what the census count this year, what that will mean for transportation in the future, as well as other services?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mention it. So in addition to serving on Trimet and a role on the school board in North Clackamas, I also work for Oregon Futures Lab. Our mission and our focus is really to see our democracy and our leadership reflect the people and the communities. And so with census efforts, I think it's really important to say that this is an opportunity in 2020 for Oregon to receive federal dollars. 2016, we received about $13 billion from the federal government that funds programs like Medicaid, free and reduced lunch for kids, education, transportation projects. And so this is going to be a really big year for all Oregonians to be counted in the census. We know that there is still a disparity in terms of folks of color, if English is not a first language, if you are renting, we see some of those groups not getting fully counted. And so it's really important that everyone can play their part and fill out the census. Census Day is April 1, and so if you're curious of when is it, Oregonians will be getting mailers in the mail beginning in March, and this is also the first time that there's going to be an online response. And so yes, if you want to see Oregon receive more money from the federal government to fund critical programs,
we could fund transit today.
Yes,
April 2. Yes,
get everyone counted. That's the key. So yes, please make sure that you do your part and tell your neighbors and friends in filling out the census.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy Way.
Thank you.
And before I welcome Juan back, I just want to thank you all for being part of this. Transit, I think, means a lot to a lot of us in different ways. I think of transit as democracy in motion, that you meet people on a bus that you do not meet other ways, and you have an opportunity for a conversation. And in a time when so many of our conversations are siloed among small, like that, transit is an opportunity to meet the people who are part of our communities, and we can build empathy. It's really an empathy box. So I really appreciate you being here, Art being here, and all of you. Thank you, Juan.
All right. We are grateful to everyone who made tonight's discussion possible. Thank you again to our speakers, Art Pierce, Kathy Way, and our moderator, Steph Routh. Thank you all so much. We welcome you to stay and ask questions of our moderator and our panelists. We want to continue the conversation. I think we have this space until about 8 p.m. or so, so please stay and engage in this conversation. And reminder that we want your feedback. We want to make these events as powerful and impactful as possible. There are comment cards out on the registration table out front. And then Stacy and Aaron, who are in the back, if you could raise your hands, they will take those cards of your feedback from you. So please take the time to fill out those comment cards tonight. Another quick reminder, memberships. Tonight is a deal, $8 a month. Don't forget to sign up before you leave, okay? Thank you all so much for coming, and stay and join us for this conversation.